So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Lucy Steeds. She's a writer, editor, and teacher specialised in exhibitions of contemporary art. Based at Central St Martin's, she's editor for After All's Exhibition Histories Research and Publishing Project and pathway leader for the MRes Art Programme in Exhibition Studies. Lucy has a doctorate in cultural history from Goldsmiths College, and her recent publications include Exhibition for the Documents of Contemporary Art series. Lucy.
So first of all, let me say my thank yous. Thank you to everybody who's made it possible for me to be here, but particularly to Sonia and Anjali. So my task today is to take you on a tour of the other story. We will be revisiting the exhibition in its first incarnation, as it was installed at the Hayward Gallery in London at the end of 1989 and the beginning of 1990. I've chosen the London iteration of the show because, as far as I've been able to determine, it's the most well documented. I'm eager to learn more in the course of today about the Wolverhampton and Manchester iterations. In fact, I have one rogue image that is claimed to represent the London exhibition, which I am sure shows another venue. So actually, I'd appreciate learning from someone here if you can help me to identify it. In this slide, we're looking at the cover of the exhibition catalogue for the other story. And it's through this important publication that the show is now mostly researched. What I hope to do today is to expand our basis for debate by focusing more on the show as a show. To the extent that it's possible, now over a quarter of a century later, I want to walk around the Hayward Galleries with you and look at the work displayed there. Clearly, we'll be looking round with the benefit of historical hindsight. But at the same time, at least in my case, it's without the benefit of having actually visited the show at the time. Today, we're privileged to revisit the exhibition in the company of at least two of the participating artists. And I'm wondering how many of you here also saw the show. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you visited the other story in any of its iterations? Keep your hand up if you saw it in London. Keep your hand up if you saw it in Manchester. Just one in Manchester. And anybody saw it in Wolverhampton? One in Wolverhampton. Super. I hope you'll help me develop the research I've done mostly on the London iteration so far. In my presentation today, I'll be drawing on archival detective work. And since this is very much still work in progress, I hope to learn from sharing some of my preliminary findings with you. In other words, my research is still far from complete, and my interpretations are speculative, in a way that I hope encourages you to intervene with challenges, nuances, and complications. So as you've already seen, this is the image of the exterior of the Hayward Gallery at the time of the show that's been used in publicity for today's event. When working on the image sections for the books in the Exhibition Histories series, which I edit for After All Research and Publishing in London, we always try to start with a photograph of the building housing an exhibition. If that is, we're focusing on a show that is in fact housed within a building. And just to be clear, this isn't always the case with the book series. Whether housed or not, the exhibition is represented visually in our books as a walk-through experience. In other words, our readers are navigated around works of art and their display context, as if exploring the exhibition on the ground. According to our editorially selected route, of course, but responsive to the givens of the environment and installation. We use maps, choreographed photographs, and carefully worded captions that do more than just title the work visible, adding details concerning, for example, relationships to adjacent works out of shot or to architectural context. The Other Story is the first exhibition for which we are developing at After All a new means of offering access as secondary visitors to the show, long since closed to their primary public. For the first time, we're working not on the printed page, but online. We're developing a digital platform and interface. This work is funded by the Paul Mellon Centre, and it complements the research being undertaken by the Black Artists and Modernism project, as Sonia's just introduced us. It also complements the self-historicisation work of the Hayward Gallery, which is currently underway, and the recent online publication of curatorial documents concerning the Other Story by Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong. The digital project I'm working on for After All is an experiment for us, and there are lots of technical and practical issues to be resolved. But we're all excited about the prospect of doing a new sort of justice to the visuospatial and undirected layout of exhibitions through using the visuospatial and interactive possibilities of the internet. Just to explain then, my tour with you today sits somewhere between the page-turning experience of reading the image section of a book in After All's Exhibition History series and the non-linear digital experience we hope to offer online later this year. And as I've already flagged, I'm going to throw in some speculative arguments. These are not yet as substantiated as anything I would happily sanction when editing essays in our book series, but I'm delighted to be able to try them out on you while sharing images today. So let's come to this particular photograph and make a start on the tour. I think it's interesting just to note the gloss given to the content of the other story in this picture, since the wording on the banner here differs from the subtitle given to the exhibition by its curator. Here we read that the show will represent Asian, African, and Caribbean artists in post-war Britain, whereas artist Rasheed Araeen, who curated the show for the Hayward Gallery, offered a slightly more tricky contraction and unity, referring to Afro-Asian artists, Afro-Asian artists, of the same place and time period, that is, in post-war Britain. Sonia's just shown you a much better image than this, so I hope you still remember the image that Sonia briefly showed at the beginning of her presentation. In this, another exterior shot of the Hayward, you can see a work by Mona Hatoum, Over My Dead Body from 1988. And we might note in passing that Mona Hatoum is not an artist that is easily identified as Afro-Asian, nor yet as Asian, African, or Caribbean. But let's look at the work. This is a billboard originally commissioned by Locus Plus for hoardings across the UK. You can see the artist's face eyeballing a toy soldier on the end of her nose. And it was made in the throes of the Iran-Iraq war. Also, we can see here the poster for the show, which was much clearer in Sonia's images here, which the poster uses imagery drawn from work by Sonia Boyce. This is Sonia's Big Women's Talk from 1984. Here again, in Sonia's work, as in Mona Hatoum's, now in the absence of eye contact between the protagonists depicted, but instead through the act of empowered listening, we see the possibility of alternative futures opening up. Sonia Boyce and Mona Hatoum were two women out of only 4 in the show. So there are 24 artists overall, so only a sixth were female. There are also 2 of the younger artists. I think Sonia was the youngest. Were you 27, Sonia? Where have you gone? Yeah, the youngest artist in the show. In the catalogue and also inside the Hayward Galleries, these 2 artists were separated into different sections. Mona Hatoum featured in the section titled Confronting the System, and Sonia Boyce featured in the one titled Recovering Cultural Metaphors. I'm going to come on to say more about these different sections in a bit, but just want to suggest at this point that here on the exterior of the building, in these pasted papers, in the form of one artwork and one promotional poster, that these artists are productively united and their respective show sections effectively intersect. So Confronting the System overlaps with Recovering Cultural Metaphors. Right, let's go into the galleries. The other story opened, like its catalogue, with a section titled In the Citadel of Modernism. This is the list of artists in the order that they are represented in the curatorial text in the catalogue, which precisely maps the order of the curatorial display of their work in the galleries. To take just a snippet from Rasheed Araeen's explanatory text for the exhibition catalogue, and I think this text was reproduced in the exhibition space, probably in summarised form. This section, in the Citadel of Modernism, groups, quote, artists whose beliefs can be located in the modernist aesthetic that postulates the idea of self-expression as its ultimate goal, while the idea of art is not questioned, end quote. Also evident from the selection of artists in this part of the show is a modernist commitment to medium specificity and to painting and sculpture above all. So if you look at this list of artists, we have 2 sculptors. The humanism and figuration section starts with Ronald Moody, and towards a new abstraction section ends with Artaji Danjal. Otherwise, we're looking at a list of painters here. And Ronald Moody is the oldest artist in the show. His works start in the 1930s, go up to the 1960s. The painting, again, is anchored in the 1930s to 50s and again continues up into the 80s, revivalism of painting. And as you can see here, and in the catalogue, so catalogue and show, this section in the Citadel of Modernism is split into 2. You've got humanism figuration towards a new abstraction. and also the artists are chronologically ordered, and they're all men. As the exhibition hang for this early part of the show is all very much the same as it is in the catalogue, I'm going to rush us through a little bit through this first section. So here we are at the beginning of the show. This is in the section Humanism Figuration within In the Citadel of Modernism. So we're looking at the work of Ronald Moody, who I mentioned was the oldest artist in the show, and behind, let's see if we've got a cursor, here we're looking at the paintings by Ivan Perez. Here we're now in that section of works by Ivan Perez, and you can see through to the work of Sousa. Now we're going to head towards those paintings. Here they are. And now in this section of paintings by Sousa, which goes around the corner here, you can see through to the work of Chandra. So the works are progressively getting later. And here's more works by Chandra. So that's the first section of the show. That's the humanism and figuration section. I don't know how well you all know the Hayward Gallery, but for those of you that are familiar with the spaces, I'm going to quickly plot the route we've taken so far. So we've popped in here, we've looked at Ronald Moody's work, gone to Ivan Perez, come through here to Sousa, and we've gone round the corner to Chandra. And that's all within the Citadel of Modernism. We're about to look at the second half of that section, starting here and working all the way to the back, and that second section is towards a new abstraction. Here again, as in the catalogue, so in the show. The artists are chronologically ordered on the page and in the galleries. This time we start with 3 painters and conclude with a sculptor. 4 painters, excuse me. So here we're looking at Aubrey Williams' work in the foreground, here and here. This is Parvez's work, and you can just see here the Frank Barling and here Balraj Khanna. Here we've gone to the end of the space and we're looking back. So now we're in the section of Balraj Khanna's work and we're looking all the way to the back wall to where Chandra was. This is a close-up of these works here. So these 3 paintings by Khanna are here, just to navigate you. And here we are right at the end of that first space with the sculptures by Danjal, and on the wall you can see photographs of his public commissions. This is the end of the stretch of Balraj Khanna's paintings. So we're back here at the back of this space, at the back of the towards abstraction space. Right, we're ready to move on to the next section of the show, as it was situated in the catalogue and in the galleries. The next sequence of 4 artists started here, tucked in amongst the abstract painters, and it goes on up these steps and into this space. I should acknowledge at this point that I'm assuming we should follow the gallery signage and not take this ramp. If you're familiar with the space, you know there's a ramp here that transitions you between these 2 spaces. I'm assuming we follow the signage of the show, which sends you around this way before going up this small flight of steps. So this way you don't shortcut from the figurative modernism up into the next section of the show. You go round through abstraction before coming into it. The second section of the show, following on from In the Citadel of Modernism, was titled Taking the Bull by the Horns. Here, the bull referenced is artistic modernism. The work gathered in this section is anchored in the artistic ferment in Europe of the 1960s. Frustratingly, here again, all the artists are men. Early installation plans for the exhibition suggest that Kim Lim was hoped to be part of this section, but as Rasheed Araeen notes in the catalogue, she, together with Anish Kapoor, Shirazeh Hushari, Derva Mistry, and Veronica Ryan, declined his invitation to participate. In Rasheed's explanatory text for the exhibition catalogue, this section, Taking the Bull by the Horns, groups artists who address, quote, not only the question of art as an alienated product of bourgeois society, but also the connection of art with life as a whole. The main tendency here could be described as anarchist, nihilist, in the radical European avant-garde tradition in which the critical function of art is central, the critical function of art. On the other hand, this is still Rasheed in the catalogue, on the other hand, it also incorporated the utopian vision in which the making of objects is no longer an ultimate goal, but part of a process or an intellectual discourse, which may involve many things or nothing. Art is no longer an object, but an idea, which can be expressed in any form, end of quote. In this section, and with these sentences, Araeen historicizes his own practice, while simultaneously showing recent work alongside some of his oldest. Here again, the exhibition's grouping and ordering of work sticks tightly to that set out in the catalogue. So we'll start with Iqbal Jeffrey. So here you can see the little flight of stairs that leads up into the rest of this section. And these are all Jeffrey's works in the show, dating from 61 to 89. And this piece here in the vitrine, which you can also see here, is the ashes of 28 paintings burnt down March 1989, and the Sacred Cow from 1962. We're going to go up these stairs to the next artist in this section, David Maddala. So here we're looking at two views of the same installation. Here, Jeffrey's paintings down here, you've come up the stairs, you're looking at this installation. Here you're looking back at the installation. So you can see the painting. Here you're standing at the top of the stairs looking across, so this painting is here. And the bubble machine piece is Cloud Canyons number 12. All the paintings in the background are labelled prominently with a sign that says works in progress. They're canvases, and you can see there's sort of installation, continuing suggestion of works, physical suggestion of works in progress, as well as the label identifying that. It is worth remembering that this Cloud Canyons work, or bubble machine piece, is related to a series first produced for the Signals Gallery 25 years before, in 1964, the year that this important space for international and experimental contemporary art in London was co-founded by Maddala. I want to remind you that Maddala writes about this gallery space, about Signals, for the exhibition catalogue for The Other Story, just as Lubaina Hamid writes a statement anchored in her own exhibition space, the Elbow Room. In other words, Rasheed Araeen gives credit to the curatorial initiatives that went before his own work on The Other Story. And long before it became widespread or fashionable, he commissioned work in the field of exhibition histories, while specifically bringing to prominence the work of artist curators. Needless to say, perhaps, the Hayward Gallery showed this bubble machine by David Maddala, care of Rasheed Araeen's Other Story, nearly 20 years before Tate acquired a work from the same series. As you may well know, Maddala played a key role in certain shows of the late 1960s and early 1970s that are now widely celebrated, including Air Art and Earth Art in the US, When Attitudes Become Form in Bern, and Harold Zeman's Documenta 5. However, the artist's visibility in the UK was not so high, and I suspect his work was even less visible here in the 1980s. We're going to move on. This is the view from the top of the stairs, which now shows us the next artist's work. So we're at the top of the stairs, looking straight to the back. And here, this work is the work of Lee Wan-Cha, which we'll look at here. Those are the pieces on the wall we were looking at, and here's what you find around the corner. So we've got Time Toy and Floating Disc Toy, both from the dated to the original year of production and extended through to the moment of exhibition. And the shapes that you can see, these are suspended from the ceiling, and the shapes that you can see here on the discs are magnetic, and they were designed to be moved by gallery visitors. And I wonder if that's why the period given to the time period given to the work comes up to the present day, because the idea is the viewer can interact and change them. I don't know whether the Hayward allowed you to do that. Does anybody who saw the show remember? You did, so you were encouraged to move them. Which is interesting because if you saw the related works recently in the Tate Modern display, it was very, very clear that you couldn't. You might recall that I think it's Hanging Disc Toy, so same series but slightly different work. It was on display as a sort of a spotlight display at Tate Modern, and it was acquired for the collection in 2004. And the label in the Tate reads, Lee made works that consisted of large, suspended, colourful metal discs with magnetic wooden blocks, many of which carry a photograph. The spectator was invited to move these blocks around the disc. Unfortunately, the work is now too fragile for this to happen. it's the privilege of showing a work, I guess, during the artist's lifetime that you can enable the original intention to be perpetuated. As at least one person in this room can tell you much better than me, Lee Woncha has a fascinating exhibition history in the UK in the 1960s and 70s, starting out with group shows at Signals, before moving on to solo shows at the Listen Gallery and group shows at the ICA in London, the Institute of Contemporary Art, and MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in Oxford. In the 1970s, this exhibition history only becomes more interesting as the artist sets up his own personal museum in Cumbria, named LYC, after his name. But by 1989, this curatorial experiment was over and Lee's work was hard to access. Same work from a different angle, and here we can see Rasheed's work, the final artist in this section of the show, which, just to remind you, is taking the bull by the horns. Here we're looking at an early sculptural and performance work by Rasheed Araeen, titled Chakras. It brings together 16 so-called water discs arranged in a grid on the floor, together with a photograph of similar objects as they navigate a dockyard in the Thames in East London. Here's a work of the sort recently showcased in the New York exhibition titled Other Primary Structures. This recent show revisited the 1966 exhibition titled Primary Structures, which has become famous for introducing the new minimalism of British and US sculptors in the 1960s. The recent revisitation revised the selection of work for display, diversifying the nationality and ethnicity of the artists represented. Both David Medalla and Rasheed Araeen featured in the show, and the curator, Jens Hoffmann, specifically credits the other story as an inspiration for his project. We might well want to debate how effective this curatorial gesture in homage is today, but I don't want to get too distracted from the other story as it was, so I'm going to return to the show. Here, with Rasheed's work in the background, this is Chakras that we just looked at, we see a screening space for video works. So there's a box being built in the galleries to display videos by Mona Hatoum. There's 4, So Much I Want to Say, Changing Parts. Oh, it's just 3, excuse me, Measures of Distance. And to the right, there are 2 canvas-based works by Gavin Yance here. With the work of Hatoum and Yance, we enter a new section of the exhibition called Confronting the System. In fact, in the original layouts of the exhibition, before the installation was finalized, the show broke off after the work of Jeffrey, Medalla, Lee, and Araeen. That is, after the section titled Taking the Bull by the Horns, and visitors were invited upstairs for the 2 final sections of the show, for Confronting the System in the first gallery and Recovering Cultural Metaphors in the second gallery upstairs. As the exhibition installation turned out, however, the work of Mona Hatoum and Gavin Yance was added downstairs, which forced something of an overlap between their section, Confronting the System, and that preceding, Taking the Bull by the Horns. This overlap is perhaps particularly apparent in the work of Gavin Yance, which you can see here. This work explicitly tackles the bull of artistic modernism, specifically the so-called primitivism of Cubist painting. Yet in tackling modernism with a geopoliticized edge, he opens up his challenge to confront a broader cultural or systemic situation. So let's go upstairs, where the section Confronting the System continues, and the final section, Recovering Cultural Metaphors, resides alongside. So here, all the artists in the rest of the show, all the artists upstairs. For me, this view into the gallery upstairs, so this is just at the top of the stairs into the second floor of the exhibition, this view is particularly interesting. It's an interesting point in the other story. It's interesting because it offers us 2 paths, 2 alternative 1980s readings of then contemporary art. If the thrust of the art historical arguments downstairs in the first 2 sections of the show are conventionally modernist, with the more radical artistic experimentation of the 1960s construed as post-medium practice and yet neo-avant-garde, then upstairs, the issue is rather how to address contemporaneity, or art in the new present. And interestingly, I think, we're offered 2 possible intellectual framings. From today's perspective, we might refer to these 2 alternatives as postmodern art on the one hand and postconceptual art on the other. And here I'm eliding the curatorial section that Rasheed Araeen titled Recovering Cultural Metaphors, with the label of postmodernism, and the alternative section titled Confronting the System, with the label of postconceptual art. Of course, these elisions of mine only go so far, but I think they sum up, in outline perhaps, one way of looking at the exhibition afresh today. Let's take one of the paths we're offered. I'm going to lead us to the left into recovering cultural metaphors. Here we're looking at the work of Kumiko Shimizu here, Viking Wall, and you're looking at the works of Donald Locke, and in the back, works by Uzo Agonu. In the catalogue for the exhibition, Rasheed Araeen opens his presentation of this section with the following paragraph, which itself anchors the question of recovering cultural metaphors in a post-colonial take on postmodernism. Quote, "The erosion of cultural identity in modernism is well recognised, but its recovery is full of pitfalls, even when it is now legitimised by postmodernism. The difficulty here lies not merely in the relationship between art and culture, but in the way this relationship is turned upside down in consideration of the other. The problem for the Afro-Asian artist is how to recover cultural difference and, at the same time, to question its inherent marginalisation within the dominant discourse." End quote. Today, I would add that in this section of the show, modernism as anchored in Western Europe is set up as one tradition or family of traditions, among others, to be productively drawn upon in order to be elaborated, complicated, and queried. Further, that post-colonial thought sharpens the postmodernism that may have been experienced or perceived at the time. We're now going to go on into the space that we're just glimpsing here. Here we have a grouping of work by 3 older artists in this section, with works by Anwar Jalal's Shemza, dating back to the late 1950s, Ugo Agono's Oils on Canvas, starting in the mid-1960s, and Donald Locke's work starting in 1970. A case is perhaps being made here for postmodernism precisely becoming possible in the first instance, historically speaking, through post-colonial thinking. And just to note, we also see Lubaina Hamid's work here. While strictly grouped in the alternative section on this floor, in Confronting the System, her work seems to resonate with the postmodernism of the 1980s and to overlap with the concerns of recovering cultural metaphors. Let's stick with this section. We're coming back out of that space, and we're going to head down this corridor where on both sides of the wall are works by Shimizu. And we're going to enter the final gallery space upstairs at the Hayward. So we've just come down this corridor here. Here, developing the section titled Recovering Cultural Metaphors, we find works from Salim Arif, and opposite, I'm guessing, although I haven't found any installation shots yet, Sonia, I'm really hoping you took some pictures of your work. No. Arr. So I'm assuming your work was opposite Arif's, but I haven't got a shot of the wall that is opposite this one. I will have to ask all the artists in the show if they have pictures to complement what's otherwise available. It's important, I think, that we find this structure in the gallery. A set of steps leading straight down to the start of the show, which relates the postmodern section upstairs directly back to the modernism anchored below. It is also important that this postmodern section ends with Sonia Boyce, I think, since her work, acutely attuned as it is to the politics of representation, makes an adept connection across to the alternative section, Confronting the System. So here we are back to the sort of bifurcation in the galleries upstairs. And now we're going to head to the right into this section, Confronting the System. Here we've got Keith Piper's work, an untitled acrylic on canvas from 1986, borrowed from Manchester City Art Galleries for the show. I'll just show you what that looks like. This is the work in situ. That's why it's a slightly bad photograph. It was just registering the work's presence in the show. It's not a very good picture of this work, and I apologize for that. Here's coming back out, and we're going to look at, this is Eddie Chambers' work on these 2 adjacent walls. Please keep an eye on these works, because we're about to see them in the next picture from another angle. We're going to go into this space. So here are those works by Eddie Chambers. We're looking back out. These are the works by Keith Piper. With these works by Eddie Chambers, we get references to exhibitions he mounted earlier in the decade. This is another moment in which the other story develops exhibition histories as well as art history. On the left, these 14 panels constituting Go West, Young Man by Keith Piper. 8 of these were reproduced in the second issue of Third Text in December 1987. Third Text being Rasheed Araeen's publication, just to show Araeen's curatorial gestures in print as well as later in the gallery space. And this work was purchased by Tate in 2008. The other work by Keith Piper here, The Black Assassin Saints from 1982, was borrowed from Sheffield City Art Galleries. Like Keith Piper's Go West, Young Man, this work is now in Tate's collection. In fact, it was more recently acquired in 2013. And again, this is another very poor image of the work as such, but its value is that it is the work in situ. And I can tell you more about where the different images come from and why some of them look like this in the questions, if it would be of interest. In the exhibition catalogue for The Other Story, Rasheed Araeen writes this in relation to this section titled Confronting the System. Quote, "The voice that emerges is the voice of the wretched of the earth, with all its suffering and pain." And here it's Frantz Fanon's Damnée de la Terre that he's referencing, of course. Araeen continues, "It is also a voice of hope and of the future, from which the inequalities of racism and sexism are eliminated." End of quote. Today, I would add that these are the voices of artists schooled in conceptual as well as earlier art, in semiotics and issues of political representation. And here's where I'm suggesting we might now catch hold of the post-conceptual strand of The Other Story, such as the show was curated by Rasheed Araeen. This section of the exhibition concludes with Lubaina Hamid's work, which you've already glanced from the Recovering Cultural Metaphors section, and with which it forms a hinge. So if you think spatially, just to show you, we came up the stairs here. Here's where you get the option to go this way or that way. Here's where Recovering Cultural Metaphors sits and continues around here. And here's where Confronting the System sits. My proposal for today is that what Rasheed Araeen offers us upstairs at the Hayward Gallery in The Other Story are 2 alternative understandings of recent art, one postmodern and one post-conceptual. We might debate whether the work of an individual artist fits best here or there, or in fact, if it's a better fit downstairs, where much recent art was also shown, or whether work downstairs might have been better upstairs. But that's not really what I find interesting or productive here. One of the things that I learned from revisiting the show today is the palpable viability of postmodernism at the time, and simultaneously that Rasheed's artistic and curatorial perspective in 1989 also wagered an alternative art regime, one which might now seem more expansive and widespread and take the name of post-conceptual art. But I'm going to go back to the plan of the upstairs, going back to this plan of the upstairs space. You might be wondering what these dotted lines show that go beyond the gallery spaces. These map the sculpture courts at the Hayward Gallery and remind us of the work shown outdoors in The Other Story. And I'm going to conclude with images of these works in the hope they allow me to recap or reprise our tour today without adding any more words. And that's basically it. Before I welcome your questions, I just wanted to add a quick postscript, just that our plans for the After All website for The Other Story will allow visitors to take many different tours through the show. It won't just be mine, the tour I've given today. And I hope that the site will allow visitors to make their own tours, to develop their own, to articulate their own guiding principles and add their own interpretive arguments. But that's it. I want to hear your arguments, questions.